There are moments when heaven is silent, and then there are moments when heaven moves. Tonight is not ordinary. This date is not random, and your house is not unseen. In Scripture, when God was about to act, He always began at the house. Before judgment fell on Egypt, something happened inside the homes. Before blessing rested on Israel, something was placed at the door. Before glory filled the temple, preparation took place within its walls. And now, on this night, December 31st, there is a stirring again. You may think this is just another evening. The lights are on, the doors are closed, life appears the same. But in the unseen realm, something has been set in motion. What is about to happen is not loud, it is not dramatic, yet it is decisive. Because when God moves, He often begins quietly in the house, in the room, in the place you call home. What happens tonight will mark a turning point. What happens tonight will separate before from after. What happens tonight will explain why resistance has lingered, why delay has persisted, and why the atmosphere has felt heavy. This is not about fear. This is about alignment. This is about timing. This is about a divine visitation that comes only when the moment is fulfilled. So do not dismiss this night. Do not ignore the prompting, and do not underestimate what God can do in a single evening inside your house, because tonight this will happen. In the pages of Scripture, God never treats the house as ordinary. The house is never just walls and a roof. It is the first place of encounter, the first place of warning, the first place of separation, and the first place of protection. Before nations shifted, houses were marked. Before judgment passed through the land, houses were distinguished. Before blessing was released into the future, houses were aligned with heaven's instruction. God does not begin with the crowd. He begins with the dwelling. He does not first address the streets. He addresses what is behind the doors, because the house is where authority is either invited or resisted. When the flood came, it was not the world that saved Noah. It was the house that God instructed him to build. When fire fell from heaven, it was not random land that was spared, but the house marked by obedience. When the destroyer moved through Egypt, it did not ask who is powerful or who is wealthy. It asked only one question: what is on the door of this house? The future of an entire generation was decided not in the palace of Pharaoh, but in the quiet obedience of households who followed a strange instruction on a specific night. That is why timing matters. God does not speak randomly, and He does not act without warning. When He gives a date, it is because something has reached fullness. When He points to a night, it is because something must be done before morning. December 31st is not a sentence on the calendar. It is a signal that something has come to its appointed hour, a signal that what has lingered too long can linger no more, a signal that heaven is moving toward the place you sleep, the place you eat, the place where prayers were whispered and tears were hidden. The house records things. It absorbs atmosphere. It remembers words spoken in frustration, prayers spoken in desperation, vows spoken in faith, and silence spoken in exhaustion. Scripture reveals that houses can be filled with peace or contention, light or heaviness, blessing or resistance. This is why God commanded Israel to tear down certain houses and cleanse others. Not because the stones were evil, but because what was hosted there had authority. What is allowed to remain unaddressed in the house eventually speaks louder than what is prayed outside of it. Tonight is about order, not human order, but divine alignment. When God prepares to change direction, He first rearranges what is closest to you. He begins with the environment that shapes you daily. That is why revival always starts in homes before it fills temples. That is why decay always begins in homes before it consumes cities. The house is the seedbed of the future. Change the house and you interrupt the cycle. Ignore the house and the cycle repeats. There are moments when God passes over, and there are moments when God passes through. Passing over spares you. Passing through transforms you. But both require recognition. The danger is not that God will not act. The danger is that His action will be misunderstood. Many think God only moves in loud miracles. Yet Scripture shows He often moves in instructions that seem small, even unnecessary. Place this, remove that. shut this door, speak this word, because obedience is never about the object. It is about alignment. What happens tonight is not visible to the natural eye. No sound will announce it. No sign will appear in the sky. Yet something will be registered in the unseen realm. Boundaries will be drawn. Authority will be reassigned. What had access will be restricted. What was delayed will be released. Because when God marks a house, He declares jurisdiction. This house belongs to me. This space is under my covering. This dwelling will not be treated as common ground. Many have been praying for change without realizing the resistance was not in the future, but in the present environment. They asked God to move mountains while ignoring what was permitted in the house. They asked for open doors while disorder remained behind closed ones. But God does not pour new wine into unprepared vessels. He prepares the dwelling before He sends the breakthrough. That is why the instruction comes before the miracle, the alignment before T. He released the night before the M.O. Earning. Tonight carries the weight of decision, not emotional decision, but spiritual positioning. Heaven responds not to noise, but to obedience. When the house is aligned, protection follows naturally. When the house is aligned, clarity returns. When the house is aligned, what was confusing begins to make sense. This is how God has always worked. Quietly, precisely, faithfully, moving through houses while the world sleeps. And this is why you were drawn to this moment. Not by accident, not by curiosity, but by divine awareness. Because something must happen tonight. And it must begin where you live, where you rest, where you dwell, where heaven has chosen to knock. First, what happens tonight will not announce itself with noise or spectacle. There will be no warning sirens, no visible signs, no interruption to routine. The world will sleep as it always does. Yet, Scripture reveals that the most irreversible acts of God often occur in silence. Creation itself began not with chaos, but with a spoken word. The destiny of Abraham changed not in a crowd, but in a quiet calling. The future of Jacob shifted not in daylight, but during a night wrestling that left a permanent mark. When God moves decisively, He often does so beyond the reach of human awareness. The unseen realm is not less real than the visible. It is more real. The visible responds to what has already been settled in the unseen. By the time a breakthrough manifests, it has already been decided. By the time resistance breaks, authority has already shifted. By the time peace returns, the battle has already been won. Tonight belongs to that hidden dimension where outcomes are determined long before they are experienced. This is where God deals not with appearances, but with roots. Scripture speaks of books being opened, words being weighed, prayers being stored, tears being counted. It speaks of angels sent on a sign. Intent, others restrained by lack of alignment. It reveals that there are moments when heaven waits, not because God is unwilling, but because timing has not yet matured. But when the moment arrives, there is no negotiation. When God says now, delay becomes disobedience. When God says tonight, tomorrow is no longer an option. What makes this night different is not emotion, but finality. Something reaches its conclusion. Something reaches its boundary. Something reaches the point where it cannot continue as it has. This is the nature of divine intervention. God allows patterns to run until they expose their futility. He allows cycles to repeat until their purpose is fulfilled. Then He intervenes not gradually, but decisively. One moment marks the end of what was tolerated and the beginning of what is established. The unseen work of God often involves separation. Light from darkness, holy from common, authorized from unauthorized. Scripture shows that when God moves, He draws lines that were previously blurred. The Red Sea did not merely open, it divided. The Jordan did not merely part, it marked transition. The blood on the doorpost did not decorate, it distinguished. Separation is not punishment, it is protection. It defines what belongs where and under whose authority it stands. Tonight, something unseen will be separated. What has been clinging without permission will lose access. What has been lingering without authority will be dismissed. What has been influencing without invitation will be silenced. This is how God restores order, not by confrontation, but by jurisdiction, not by force, but by authority. When heaven establishes boundaries, the enemy does not need to be fought. He must retreat. Many misunderstand delay as denial. They assume silence means absence. But Scripture reveals that silence often means preparation go. D prepares the outcome while humans endure the process. He prepares the victory while they experience the tension. The unseen work of God is rarely comfortable, but it is always purposeful. Tonight represents the completion of unseen preparation. What has been forming quietly is now ready to take effect. There are things that cannot be undone once heaven has ruled. Esau could not retrieve the blessing once it was released. Pharaoh could not stop the Exodus once the final sign was completed. The stone could not hold Jesus once resurrection power was activated. These were not emotional events. They were irreversible decisions made in the unseen realm and manifested in time. Tonight carries that same principle. What happens will not require repetition. What happens will not need reinforcement. What happens will not depend on human strength to maintain. The danger is assuming nothing has changed because nothing feels different. But Scripture warns that faith does not follow sight. Sight follows faith. Those who waited to see before believing missed their moment. Those who obeyed without understanding stepped into protection. Tonight requires recognition, not reaction. Awareness, not anxiety. Alignment, not argument. Because God does not ask for permission when the time has come. He asks for agreement. Unseen does not mean insignificant. It means foundational. Foundations are laid underground, but they determine the strength of what rises above. If the foundation shifts, everything built upon it changes. Tonight is a foundational night. Something beneath the surface is being reset. Something structural is being corrected. Something long-standing is being redefined. And once a foundation is corrected, the structure above it can finally rise without strain. This is how God works in mercy. He does not always remove the storm immediately. Sometimes He strengthens the shelter. He does not always eliminate opposition. Times He removes its access. He does not always change circumstances. Sometimes He changes authority. And when authority changes, circumstances follow naturally. The unseen precedes the visible every time. Many will wake tomorrow sensing relief without explanation. Others will notice clarity where confusion once dominated. Some will feel resistance lifted without knowing why. This is because what happened was not emotional. It was governmental. Heaven issued a decree. The house was addressed. The boundary was enforced. And once heaven speaks, the earth must eventually respond. This is the quiet power of divine action. No applause, no announcement, just resolution set into motion while the world remains unaware. A house is never neutral ground. Scripture never treats it as passive space. From the beginning, the house has been a witness. It hears what is spoken in secret. It absorbs what is practiced in repetition. It reflects what is honored and what is ignored. Long before people realize something has shifted, the house already knows. Because walls do not just divide rooms, they guard atmospheres. Doors do not merely open and close, they grant or deny access. Windows do not only let in light, they determine what is allowed to look in and what is allowed to look out. When God addresses a house, He is not speaking to furniture or foundations. He is speaking to agreement. He is speaking to authority. He is speaking to what has been permitted to remain. In Scripture, when something was wrong in the land, God did not always confront the people directly. He confronted the house. He commanded certain houses to be cleansed, others to be dismantled, others to be marked, because the condition of the house reveals what is ruling within it. A house can host peace or contention, blessing or barrenness, clarity or confusion, rest or unrest, not by chance, but by what has been allowed to take root. The house witnesses patterns. It witnesses cycles that repeat despite prayers. It witnesses arguments that resurface without resolution. It witnesses weariness that settles without cause. It witnesses delays that feel unexplainable. And over time, what the house witnesses begins to speak back. This is why Scripture warns that blood cries from the ground and stones testify. Creation itself records spiritual reality. Nothing is as hidden as people think. The house remembers. This is why when God prepares to restore, He often exposes. Exposure is not condemnation, it is correction. It is the mercy of revealing what must be addressed before it can destroy. When a house becomes a witness against its inhabitants, it does not do so out of malice, but out of alignment. It reflects what it has been given. That is why ignoring the condition of the house allows cycles to continue unchecked. But when God intervenes, He interrupts the testimony. He changes what the house will say about those who dwell within it. Tonight is about testimony, not public testimony, but spiritual record. Something about the house is being addressed so that it will no longer speak against the future. Something that has been silently agreeing with resistance is being stripped of its voice, because a house can either accuse or protect. It can either echo chaos or release peace. It can either amplify delay or establish order. The difference is not the structure, it is the authority that governs it. Scripture shows that when a house comes under divine authority, it becomes a shelter even in the midst of judgment. Rahab's house stood while Jericho fell. The Israelite home stood while Egypt mourned. The upper room became a birthplace of power, while the city outside remained unchanged. These houses were not spared because of location or design, but because of alignment. They became witnesses' foe. Our deliverance rather than witnesses against their occupants. There are times when people wonder why prayer feels resisted, why peace feels fragile, why progress feels unstable. Often it is because the house has been carrying unresolved spiritual weight, not dramatic, not obvious, but persistent. Small compromises tolerated, old words spoken never renounced, patterns accepted as normal, objects kept without discernment, habits repeated without question. Over time, these things form agreement, and agreement creates atmosphere, and atmosphere invites influence. God does not invade houses, He reclaims them. He reminds them who they belong to. When He does, the house shifts from being a passive observer to an active participant in protection. It begins to guard sleep instead of disturbing it. It begins to host clarity instead of confusion. It begins to amplify prayer instead of resistance. This is not mystical language. It is biblical reality. Scripture repeatedly ties household order to spiritual authority. Tonight marks a moment where the house is no longer allowed to remain silent. It will no longer quietly tolerate what undermines the future. It will no longer echo what weakens faith. It will no longer agree with cycles that were never meant to continue. Its testimony is being rewritten. Its alignment is being restored. And when the house changes what it agrees with, everything connected to it begins to respond. This is why God often speaks instructions that seem simple but carry weight. Clean this, remove that, place this, speak this. These are not rituals. They are declarations. They are acts of authority that signal a change in jurisdiction. When the house responds, heaven responds. When the house aligns, protection activates. When the house is ordered, peace becomes stable rather than fleeting. Many underestimate how deeply God values the dwelling place. He does know. He only desires temples made of stone. He desires ordered spaces where His presence is honored. He does not only look at hearts, He looks at what surrounds them. Because what surrounds you shapes you. That is why Scripture speaks of blessing resting upon households, not just individuals. When a house comes under divine alignment, it becomes a covering not only for the present generation, but for those who will dwell thereafter. Tonight, the house is being repositioned. From witness against to witness, for silent resistance to active shelter, from passive space to protected ground. What has been observing will now begin guarding. What has been absorbing will end. I'll begin releasing. What has been remembering disorder will now begin remembering alignment. And once a house changes its testimony, the future attached to it cannot remain the same. Alignment is never about perfection. It is about position. In Scripture, God did not wait for flawless people to move, but He required aligned spaces to act. He did not ask Israel to understand the mystery of the flood. He asked them to apply it. He did not ask Noah to comprehend the flood. He asked him to build according to instruction. Alignment is obedience that trusts timing over logic. And when alignment occurs, what was delayed outside the house begins to move without resistance. Delay is rarely caused by lack of prayer. More often, it is caused by misalignment. Heaven responds to order. Disorder creates friction. Scripture reveals that God is not the author of confusion, which means confusion is not neutral. Where confusion remains unaddressed, authority is weakened. Where authority is weakened, progress slows. This is why people can pray sincerely yet feel stagnant. The issue is not sincerity, it is structure. God works through order, and order begins in the place of dwelling. Throughout Scripture, whenever alignment was restored inside the house, external circumstances shifted naturally. When Edom's house came into alignment with the presence of God, blessing followed without effort. When Joshua declared that his house would serve the Lord, the nation was challenged to realign. When Cornelius ordered his household, heaven responded with visitation. The pattern is consistent. Alignment inside releases movement outside. The house is where thought patterns form, where words are repeated, where habits are established. It is where faith is either reinforced or eroded. If disorder is normalized there, resistance feels constant elsewhere. But when alignment is restored, resistance says its grip. Not because circumstances instantly change, but because authority does, and authority determines outcome. Alignment is subtle. It does not always feel powerful. It often feels inconvenient. It challenges what has been tolerated. It questions what has been excused. It brings awareness to what has been ignored. This is why alignment is resisted more than breakthrough. People want the result without the rearrangement, but Scripture never shows God bypassing alignment to grant release. He corrects the foundation before He expands the territory. There are things that cannot move forward until something else is put back in place, not because God is withholding, but because progression without alignment would damage what is coming. A door opened too early becomes a burden. A blessing received without structure becomes a strain. God delays not to punish, but to preserve. Alignment ensures that when release comes, it can be sustained. Tonight is about that internal correction. Not dramatic, not emotional, but precise. Something shifts in how the house agrees with heaven. Something settles into order. Something realigns with divine intent. And once alignment occurs, what was stalled begins to flow without force. Doors open without struggle. Conversations change without manipulation. Opportunities arise without pursuit. Because alignment removes friction. This is why Scripture places such emphasis on instruction. Instruction is not control, it is protection. When God gives instruction regarding the house, it is because the house is connected to the future. What happens within those walls affects what unfolds beyond them. When instruction is followed, the future responds. When it is ignored, the future resists. Many do not realize that delay itself is a signal. It reveals where alignment is missing. It points to something out of order. God allows delay to expose decency on outcomes rather than obedience. But once alignment is restored, delay loses its purpose. It no longer needs to remain. And when delay leaves, movement begins quietly, steadily, inevitably. Alignment also brings clarity. Confusion cannot coexist with order. When alignment is established, clarity replaces anxiety. Direction replaces restlessness. Peace replaces tension. This is not emotional peace, but structural peace. A peace that remains regardless of circumstance because it is rooted in authority, not comfort. The house aligned with heaven becomes a place of rest rather than recovery. Sleep becomes uninterrupted. Thoughts become settled. Prayer becomes focused. Decisions become easier, not because life becomes perfect, but because resistance is no longer internal. The house no longer works against its inhabitants. It supports them. This alignment does not depend on size, wealth, or appearance. Scripture never links blessing to architecture, it links it to obedience. A small house aligned with heaven carries more authority than a palace out of order, because authority does not respond to scale, it responds to position. Tonight represents a correction point, a moment where alignment replaces tolerance, where order replaces neglect, where authority replaces compromise. And once that shift happens, what was waiting begins to move. Not slowly, but steadily, not emotionally, but structurally. Because when alignment is restored, heaven does not need persuasion to act. This is how God prepares the next season. He aligns before He advances. He orders before He opens. He corrects before He releases. And when the house responds, the future responds with it. What has been delayed finds clearance. What has been resisted finds passage. What has been prayed for finds footing. Not because effort increased, but because alignment was restored. And once alignment is restored, it does not need to be forced again. It holds, it remains, it governs. The house stands as a witness not of struggle, but of order, not of delay, but of release, not of confusion, but of clarity. And from that alignment, everything connected to the house begins to shift in sequence, in timing, in purpose, in outcome. There are moments when God closes a chapter, not by noise, but by sealing. Scripture shows that endings are often quiet. When Noah entered the ark, it was God who shut the door, not Noah. The door closing was not dramatic, but it was final. What was outside could no longer come in. What was inside was now under divine protection. That is how God ends seasons. He does not always announce them. He secures them. And when He secures something, it no longer depends on human strength to maintain it. Many people struggle because old seasons are never properly closed. They pray for new beginnings while old permissions remain open. They ask for peace while access points to disturbance stay unguarded. They ask for growth while doors to distraction are never shut. Scripture reveals that God is a God of gates and doors, openings and closings. What He opens, no one can shut, and what He shuts, no one can open. Closure is not loss. It is mercy. It prevents what no longer belongs from continuing to drain what is coming. A season ends when authority changes, not when feelings change, not when circumstances improve. Authority determines access. When God closes a door, it is not punishment, it is protection. It signals that something has fulfilled its assignment. Some struggles were allowed only for a time. Some battles were permitted only for a season. Some pressures were tools, not destinations. And when their work is complete, God removes their access. Scripture shows that unfinished endings create instability. Saul's refusal to fully end what God commanded caused prolong. GED conflict. Israel's failure to drive out what was instructed resulted in cycles of compromise. Incomplete closure always invites future trouble. But when God brings true closure, peace follows. Not emotional peace, but structural peace. A peace that remains even when memories resurface. A peace that does not require constant effort to protect. Tonight represents sealing. Something is being closed so that something else can finally begin. Not everything that ends was evil. Some things simply expired. Assignments end. Seasons shift. Roles change. And clinging to what God has finished delays what He has prepared. Closure is an act of trust. It acknowledges that God's timing is wiser than attachment. The house plays a critical role in closure because what is left open in the dwelling often keeps seasons alive beyond their time. Words spoken there keep agreements active. Objects kept there keep memories influential. Patterns repeated there keep cycles breathing. God addresses the house when He wants to seal a season because the house is where access is maintained. When the house changes its agreement, the season loses its anchor. This is why Scripture speaks of shutting doors, cleansing spaces, setting boo and dairies. These are not symbolic gestures. They are acts of authority. They declare that something no longer has permission to remain. Closure is not denial of the past. It is release from its control. When God closes a season, He removes its claim on your future. Many fear closure because they associate it with loss. But Scripture associates closure with deliverance. The Red Sea closed after Israel crossed, preventing pursuit. The tomb was sealed not to trap life, but to expose resurrection. Closure prevents return to bondage. It removes the option of retreat. It forces forward movement by eliminating backward access. When God seals something, it does not reopen under pressure or emotion. Tonight, something is being sealed at the level of authority, not visibly, but decisively. An open loop is closing. An unresolved chapter is being finished. A cycle that overstates its assignment is losing access. This is not something you force. It is something you recognize, because recognition aligns you with what God is already doing. Closure creates space. Space for clarity. Space for rest. Space for new instruction. Until something ends, nothing new can fully begin. God does not stack seasons. He replaces them. He does not overlap authorities. He transfers them. And when the transfer is complete, the old no longer competes with the new. The sealing also brings stability. What was draining attention loses relevance. What was pulling focus loses influence. What was demanding energy without fruit loses voice. Stability is not stagnation. It is strength without leakage. When closure occurs, strength is conserved for what matters. The house aligned with closure becomes quieter, not empty but settled. The noise of unfinished business fades. The tension of unresolved pressure eases. Sleep deepens. Thought slows. Prayer simplifies because the background resistance has been removed. T remains is no longer contested. God does not rush closure. He completes it when its purpose is fulfilled. And when He does, He does not explain every reason. He seals and moves forward. Faith does not require explanation to follow closure. It requires trust. Trust that what God ends, He ends well. Tonight marks that sealing moment. Not emotional, not dramatic, but authoritative. Something no longer foe allows you. Something no longer waits for an opening. Something no longer has a voice in your decisions. The season is closed. The access is shut. The authority has shifted. And from this closure, a new alignment quietly takes its place, preparing the way for what comes next.